Hello, everybody, and welcome to another of our VAC roundtables. Today, we're joined by one of our friendlies and somebody we respect as we continue our respect series. And absolutely, we're so happy to um, have Rachelle Gordon of greenstate.com. And she's been a journalist for many moons, and she has helped. Of course, been a judge. She has spoken out in defense of cannabis time and time again. And so it was about time to bring her in and have that conversation. So we use these as tools to educate our veterans because not all of our veterans are aware of the history in the cannabis movement. Some are not. So we're very happy to have the fortunate ability to move things forward in a way that. We pay you 50 quid. Sorry, 1 second. We had some technical difficulties. Still having a bit of technical difficulties trying to get our VAC. There it goes. It goes now. All right. So with that, we will change our view because we want to see the person we're interviewing. All right. So first off, out the get, Rachelle, is how did you originally come to cannabis? And that's a multi-layered question in the sense of, you know, when did you first hear about it? When did you, get first turned on? And, when did you decide it was going to become your life?
It's a great question, and I just want to start by saying thank you so much to VAC for having me tonight. It's a huge honor, and Nate especially for kind of introducing me into the fold. So thank you so much, guys. It's a real honor. My journey with cannabis started when I was a teenager. A lot of my friends, my peers started using cannabis, I guess fairly early, in middle school, seventh grade, eighth grade. At first, I was fairly anti-drug and alcohol. There's a lot of addiction in my family, and and many people in the Dare generation, I thought that cannabis was a gateway, right? And it led to all these horrible things. And then by the time I was 15, 16, more of my friends were using it. I noticed that they seemed a lot more chill than all the people who were drinking every weekend. So I decided to try it and I fell in love immediately. I said, what have I been thinking this whole time? Obviously, this plant is amazing. It didn't have all of the terrible side effects of alcohol, and I just really, really enjoyed it. Started smoking it really regularly. And I actually got to be an au pair, which is a fancy word for a nanny, in right outside of Amsterdam when I was 20. So spent a lot of time chilling out in coffee shops in Amsterdam and learning more about cannabis culture. And it wasn't until much later, though, that I realized it could potentially be a career. I was actually working in education. That's what I studied in college. I was working with kids. And I ended up getting arrested for cannabis outside of school in 2011. And I had to lose my career while I was dealing with my criminal case and just started doing writing more as a side hustle. Initially, I was writing about sustainability education. I was not classically trained. It always just came naturally to me writing. I enjoyed it, growing up. Never thought of it as a career. But then legal cannabis started happening across the country, and I started finding gigs writing for, cannabis brands, CBD websites, things like that. Fast forward, a lot of right place, right time sort of stuff. And I was a full-time cannabis journalist, traveling all over the country and the world, learning about the plant, meeting different people, and telling their stories. So it's been a really, really awesome journey. I realized it was my destiny early on in my plant medicine journalism career, and just super interesting how things work out. I do believe that if I hadn't have been busted, I probably wouldn't be where I am today.
It's amazing how the effect of the law has sparked quite a few lives in activism. So it seems you're in good company. So thank you for that, and thank you for joining us tonight. Next up will be Council Member Mike Davis with our next question.
Yeah, hey,
Welcome.
hey Rochelle, thanks for joining us. So you've been covering cannabis since excuse me, you've been covering cannabis since 2015. What first drew you to the plant, and how did that lead to a full-time career as a cannabis journalist?
It was really interesting. When I first discovered the plant, I loved the energy that it provided, right? I loved how it was more communal. I loved how it made me feel at peace. Coming from a lot of trauma, I felt relaxed, right? And I know that veterans can understand exactly what I'm talking about there, right? And I just loved the community, right? And the fellowship. It was so incredible, especially being in Amsterdam and meeting people from all over the world who were all, connected by this one thing. It was really special. And fast forward, I didn't realize, it could be a career. And then I remember one of the very first people I met when I was in this journey was a woman who had a 4-year-old daughter who had been diagnosed when she was a baby with this really rare genetic condition. She had a lot of seizures. They did not expect her to live past one. And she started treating her with cannabis oil, and she was 4 years old, right? And seeing that mother's strength and the healing properties that this plant had, I recognized in that moment I had to tell these stories so that more people could understand what was possible with this plant. And I don't take it lightly. I really do consider it a responsibility. I try to be a steward of the plant in order to be an evangelist, right? And sort of push back on a lot of the reefer madness that people have come to understand in the past and see that this plant, it might not be for everybody, but it certainly has a lot of different properties that people should at least know about, right? And make an informed decision for themselves.
Absolutely. All right. Next up will be Council Member Nate Landau. Council Member.
Hey, Nate.
There you go.
Hey, Rachelle, first of all, I know you personally, so I want to say how it's been so amazing that you've been a great fan of ours and you're just so genuine and nice and you really stick out in a good way in the industry. My question is, as an Emerald Cup judge and a Butters critic, what qualities do you look for when evaluating cannabis flower, concentrate, or products? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And hey, Nate, you're awesome. I love your products. I love your spirit. You and Joe, if Joe's watching, hey, bud. Um, yeah, so judging cannabis to me is really fascinating because it's so nuanced and every person is so different, both with how they respond, their bodies, and just what smells good to them, what looks good to them. So I try to be really objective when I'm assessing product. A lot of times, different contests, whether it's Emerald Cup, the California State Fair, they utilize different metrics in what they're looking for. Oftentimes with flower, it starts visually, right? The color, the trichome density, the trim. We're talking about the aroma. How robust is it? What about the flavor? How strong is that? The aftertaste. I like to look at the packaging, right? How is the packaging designed? What information is on there for the consumers? And then for me, the effects are secondary always because those are more subjective, right? Something that makes you feel, energetic and hyper and creative, it might make me feel sleepy, right? Everybody's so different. And so we really can't go on that. Buddhist specifically is a platform that utilizes a 100-point scale to assess the things like the aroma, the flavor, right? All these different things. And they try to really quantify that, which I find awesome and has been super great to be a part of the Buddhist platform, sort of, from the early days. Now they're about to launch a big coast to coast contest for MJ Biz. Really exciting. But yeah, the nuances and the conversations that I have with other judges, it's always so fascinating, especially when I'm judging finished goods, like cartridges or edibles, right? Because there's so much more that goes into it. With the carts, you're looking at the hardware, right? The quality of the oil. With the edibles, you're basically becoming a culinary judge, right? In addition to a weed judge. And it's been a lot of fun to be a part of that, and always looking forward to more opportunities to assess for sure.
Yes, as a cartridge judge, one of the things, yes, we would also look at environmental packaging, what was, single use with battery as opposed to, separate 510 battery for 510 cart, or the biggest problem we see is everybody has, you know, exclusive hardware for their cart as well as their. Nate Landau has a follow up.
Oh.
So I know sometimes you have to test ungodly amounts of products. I know different judges. I know it's a good problem to have, but I know different judges have different strategies, and I know that you really care about giving your best evaluation possible. I'm just curious of what your strategy for that. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Nate. Like so often when we're judging contests, we have a very short window of time to get it done. And you're absolutely right. We want to make sure that we're giving everybody our undivided attention, but realistically, it's just not possible to fully assess every single product. Sometimes there's something like 100 different entries in one competition in one category. So something I'll do, it depends on the product. For example, with carts. One thing I'll do is just like a rapid fire. I'll look at the packaging, I'll open it up, I'll check out the hardware, I'll take one hit. And oftentimes, and correct me if I'm wrong, if this is your strategy as well, with the cart, it was kind of easy to tell, okay, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, right? Like whether, maybe the hardware was faulty, that's an automatic, no. If it was leaking, right, automatic no, right? If something was off with the flavor, it didn't hit right, you can kind of parcel things out into those, yes, maybe, no's, and then dive deeper from there. With the edibles, I've judged drinks before. I've never judged edibles. I'm not a big edible person. But with the drinks, again, like, quick sip, quick sip, quick sip, before you also get too lit. Like, God bless all the edibles judges, for doing what they do, because I don't think that's an easy task, right? And I'm sure for them, they're judging more about, the onset. How long did it take to kick in? Which is again subjective, but it's something that, has to be accounted for. So yeah, it's definitely not an easy task, but it's a really, really fun task too.
Well, thank you for bringing it because there is different nuances. You're correct. I've only done like herb and hash and carts. It would be a hard time to do edibles and because like my first Emerald Cup we had like a 72-hour turnaround for like 86 carts. So it helps to have a high titration level if you're gonna do something like that. Or what we used to do when we would go to travel to Amsterdam for like the Cannabis Cup, we would literally like be prepping ourselves to handle a larger amount of joints the week before to get ourselves ready, just in case, because you just never know.
Yeah,
All
you have to
right.
like warm up to it almost.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's athletic like in that resolve.
Yeah.
Okay. Next up will be Council Member Michael Crowitz with our next question. Council Member.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us, Rochelle. It's great to see you. Before I get into the question, you guys have just spurred a memory. It's weird. I hadn't thought about this in a long time. Of course, I did Cannabis Cup judging, so I remember it was one thing for sure. Like you didn't want to try to leave anything to memory. I would clear my tray completely and have just the bud that I'm looking at on the tray, so I didn't confuse anything. And then I would take the notes immediately. And then like 5 minutes later, I couldn't tell you, like, we were on to the next thing already. But it's funny, the memory that I just had, I haven't thought about this in a long time, but back in the day when I would be testing, herb to see if I liked it or not, and I don't think that's actually even one of the things that you're asked when you're judging whether you liked it or not. But to really know if I liked it or loved it, if it was something that was really right for me, like Colombian Gold kind of stuff. I'm talking about Wayback Machine. And I remember I used to require 3 days. I had to wake up and go to bed with it for 3 days. Then I could give you like my opinion on it. And it's so funny. I hadn't thought about that in forever, Etienne. It's so funny that I just remembered that. But this question, I find this interesting, especially these days. We're dealing with so many different sort of worlds that were have been sort of created that operate as little islands of thought on the internet and stuff. And of course, you write for greenstate.com. Greenstate.com. I need to say it like 3 times, right? But yeah, you also write though on High Times, Cannabis Now. So when you're writing for these and greenstate.com, see, I said it 3 times, and when you're doing these articles, though, I mean, is it what like your style and you just lay them down, or do you actually think about your audience for those particular venues, like when you're writing? How does that work?
That's an awesome question, because I know a lot of other writers who, write for different publications, and some people develop their own voice, which I believe that I have, but I definitely try to tailor things for specific audiences, especially if I'm writing for more of a B2B, like an MG retailer or something like that, Cannabis Business Time, something that more like people in the industry will be reading versus the general consumer. Green State, we're definitely more looking at the Canna Curious and people who I would refer to as the Canna Curious adjacent, like maybe people who won't try pot, but there are other things that intersect with cannabis culture that they might be interested in, whether it's music, fine dining, right, movies, things like that. And then High Times, obviously it's more like heady, right? And so while I always try to be really authentic in my own voice, I definitely tweak things, like when I'm writing for Green State, we try not to go too much inside baseball. Like we do a lot of slang check. And I think about, okay, like, could my grandma understand this article? And if there's something in there, like a term that, we in our culture use, but maybe they don't understand, I try really hard to either explain what that is or pick a different word because I really want to write content that feels approachable and accessible for everybody, right? I mean, to your point, Michael, like we definitely exist kind of like in a bubble in cannabis, in an echo chamber, and we forget that the learning curve is so steep with this stuff. And there are people, who've never experienced the plant. All they see is what's in like mainstream media. And so if we want to really reach them and make them feel seen, like they can understand, we have to get on their level. I read this book in college called Rules for Radicals by this guy, Saul Alinsky, who was a community organizer. And he always talked about approaching people on their level. And that's like the most successful way to kind of get your message across and get folks behind what you're saying. So I really try to keep that in mind whenever I'm writing whatever it is, right? And also the actionable insights. So if I'm writing a review of a new device, right, I'm trying to think like, what exactly would I want to know if I was about to go out and potentially spend money on this product? What do I need to know to make an informed decision? And I try to use that approach as well with all of my writing too, making sure that people have all the information they need, but I don't want to overwhelm them either. So I try to stay concise.
One of the things in the military they do is because you don't have to have the highest literary rate to be in the military, depending, especially in my job being in artillery, uh, that the military puts out a comic book for maintenance monthly because of how bad reading efficiency is, etc. So we understand the need to not necessarily dumb it down, but make it as accessible across as many cultures as possible, right? So, which is, I think, is a key thing. I think you touched on a significant point on how siloed we become in the movement with our own. It's the same way in the military. We have an acronym for pretty much absolutely everything. Um, and in our movement, we've done the same just to shorten things down. Um, but I think that you're bridging a natural gap that needs to be always there, which is a layman's explanation so that they get it. Because with policy and, of course, with science, it can go to zero to over your head real quick. So thank you for taking that time and doing that. I have our next question. And as a neurodivergent person myself, you've expressed a deep interest in cannabis for neurological conditions and autism spectrum disorder. Can you share any compelling stories or research that have shaped your understanding in this area?
Yeah, those are two areas that I really love to cover and love to write about because I have a personal experience with them. And so I'll start with that and then we'll talk about the exciting stuff, the science, right? Um, a lot of people who follow me have heard me talk about my dad, who was a huge influence on me. Growing up, he suffered from severe epilepsy and was not responding to medication. He had several petit mal seizures a day. I can remember him zoning out. He couldn't have a driver's license. And when I was about 8 or 9 years old, he decided to have a brain surgery that could potentially correct the epilepsy. And he ended up having a massive stroke right after the surgery and was left paralyzed on one half of his body. He had brain damage. Oh, my dog's coming in. And he ended up, sorry.
It's okay. We love animals. You know.
Yeah, my dog is bursting here. Thank
What's-
you.
What's your dog's name?
Peggy. My dog's name is Peggy. My husband Kurt just came and grabbed her. She's adorable, but a menace. Go to my Instagram, Rachelle the writer, if you want to see a nice picture of Peggy. But at any rate, the stroke really impacted my father's life in a negative sort of way. And he ended up in assisted living, nursing homes, and he passed away in 2020 from long-term complications from his stroke. And knowing what we know now about cannabis and its efficacy with seizure disorders, I can't help but wonder if maybe he could have tried it. Maybe he'd still be here today. Maybe things would have been a lot different for him. And so I remember, again, one of the first people I met doing this was a guy in Colorado who told me he'd been seizure free for 10 years because of cannabis. And I told my dad about him, and my dad was like, wow, I wonder if it could have worked for me. And it was heartbreaking, and it really made me realize again that this was the path I was meant to be on. So I could tell these stories so that people could at least understand that they have a choice. It might not work for them, but hey, it's out here, right? Look into it. And the same thing with autism spectrum disorder. My nephew is nonverbal. He's autistic. He's about to turn 11, and the CBD oil has been incredible for him. With a lot of his, uncomfortable behaviors, like with the self-injurious behaviors, and those are the studies that I've been really excited to read. There are not a lot of big ones, but we've been seeing all these case studies coming out of cannabis oil specifically being really, really helpful for people with autism as they, want to maybe potentially reduce some of like the stimming, the tics, the self-injurious behavior. I've even read about cases where it's helped people communicate because it helps calm your body down. The endocannabinoid system is meant to help promote homeostasis, harmony in our bodies. And so if your body is at peace, maybe the mind can be at peace too and help all these systems work together. And I have really high hopes for what cannabis can do for folks with ASD in terms of, especially the folks who are nonverbal, who are really struggling to communicate, because seeing my nephew struggle, and cry because he can't get the words out, it's just heartbreaking. And knowing that this could be a potential for him and others like him, it's really exciting. And it's why I keep doing what I do. I mean, I won't lie. Getting high is awesome, right? I love it. I love weed, but this is far more important, right? The medical aspect and what this plant can do for people and their families to improve their quality of life.
110%. Feel ya.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry about your dad. Nate has a follow-up.
Yeah, Nate. And thank you so much. My dad was
And
awesome.
when you posted about your dad a few months ago, I think it was 5 years since he passed. That was what struck me to reach out to you to come on, because that really struck a chord for me as well. And the impact on autism is also very important. I just wanted to mention a peer-reviewed study. I'll send it to you later, where through machine learning and a saliva sample, they took a control group of kids without and kids with it, and they showed that 90 minutes after taking CBD oil, the aggression levels and the biomarkers for the kids with autism went completely down, with pretty much the same as the kids without autism. And I don't know about other states, but in California, adults with autism, the state only helps them to a certain point, and then it kind of falls on the family. I think it's 22 or 24. So that group that did this study is actually working to show the state that they can actually save money by funding this research, so then it's less a toll on the family and the state. Because unfortunately, if we have a certain condition, there's a certain limit of how much you can integrate into society. So I'm very fascinated. I'll send it to you. So thanks for sharing and being vulnerable, because it's also something that's really important to me.
Thank you. Yeah, no, please send that over. Every single study that comes out, I immediately send it to my sister. I'm like, look at this, it's so exciting. And actually, I met a person a couple of years ago, and she said, "Oh, I read one of your articles about cannabis and autism, and my son's autistic, and we decided to try it. It's been really helpful." And so that right there, stories like that, it gives me chills, and it's like, wow, maybe I for sure am on the right path, right, telling these stories, because that's what it's all about, is just people finding a better quality of life. So thank you for that. Yeah.
And if you can just touch one, right, then it's all been worth it, and that's when you know you've actually touched some money and made a difference, and that's a nice reminder of you're doing well with what you're doing too. You're not just doing it; you're doing it well. So kudos. Next up will be Mike Davis with our next question.
Yeah. Hey, so how do you balance being a critic with being a steward of the plant, especially in an industry where honesty can sometimes clash with commercial interests?
Also a really good question. And it's kind of tough sometimes. Also because I feel like I'm pretty nice. I'm like Midwestern, so I'm very polite. So I am not the kind of person to go on a tear typically, unless okay, I'll take that back. In certain situations, I will. Like for example, I posted this thing earlier this week about National Geographic magazine and how they're like spewing a lot of very one-sided coverage of cannabis and like not in a good way. And so I had to point out the hypocrisy there. But when it comes to judging products or writing about companies, I really, really try to be balanced and objective. And it can be difficult on both sides, right? You know, you don't want to give favorable coverage to people that are your friends, right? You have to be honest. And you don't necessarily want to slam the people that maybe behind closed doors you're like not as excited about, right? And so typically when it comes to reviewing products, I will always be honest. If there's something constructive, I'll mention it, but I'm not rude about it. If something is really, in my opinion, you know, low quality, or it has a lot of problems, I like to just, you know, if you don't have something nice to say nothing at all. In which case, I just, you know, I won't write about it. And maybe privately, I'll give feedback. I did have a situation like that a couple of years ago. A company sent me a device, and I had a lot of issues with the device in a lot of different ways. And so I decided I can't write about this, but I will give you some feedback. So maybe as you're continuing to develop this product, it's something you might want to consider, but it's really not my style to put people on blast. And it can be hard though to, you know, tell tough stories, right? You know, when maybe a perceived negative story comes out about a brand that you really like or a person that you really like, it's still, you know, you still have to cover it, right? So maybe a brand that you really like, they had a recall or, you know, something else controversial that is newsworthy. And it's like, oh, I don't want to draw attention to this bad thing, but I also don't want to be biased, right? So it can be tough, but I've learned over the years how important it is to have an ethical standard in journalism, especially in cannabis, right? Because a lot of our cannabis publications come from the niche, right? And there weren't really these journalistic ethics and rules being abided by or even looked at, right? And so I like that I can maybe raise the bar in that sort of way and be a good role model for people who want to get into this space someday.
Right on. Well, thank you for that. Next up will be Nate Landau with our next question.
Cannabis journalism has evolved rapidly over the last decade. From your perspective, what are the most significant changes you are seeing in coverage, tone, and public perception? Thank you.
Oh, yeah. So that's like for me a two-pronged answer. So I'll start with the first thing, which is like the broader like cannabis journalism spot. Obviously, we're all seeing a lot more mainstream coverage of cannabis, especially in the last couple of years as we're talking about potentially rescheduling, right? Things like that. And I'm definitely concerned about the mainstream narrative around cannabis. Um, you know, I've been seeing a lot of perceived negative press, right? A lot of, you know, what I would call reefer madness 2.0, right? Like, oh, the cannabis and psychosis, like all the children eating gummies, right? Like those are the headlines that are dominating the news cycle for the most part, right? And the really nice stories about, oh, like this is a brand that overcame adversity, or this is a study of how it helped people with autism, right? Like those are kind of being pushed to the side and they end up more in the niche media, right? Like in within our bubble, but you don't necessarily always see them in the mainstream. And I understand why though. Like I said, I just wrote about this for Green State this week about National Geographic. And that is there's an old saying in journalism, I'm sure you've heard it, if it bleeds, it leads, right? People want to read about things oftentimes that are dramatic, divisive. People are drawn to that. And in this era where there's so much noise and there's so much competition for people's attention, it's really, really hard to grab people and get them to click on your story. And so I totally understand why they're doing that, but it's also really frustrating because it only perpetuates these negative stereotypes and these negative narratives around cannabis. But at the same time, for me personally, it's something that I've also had to subscribe to a little bit, right? Because working at Green State, our parent company is a really big company. And so they have a lot more rules about and expectations about traffic, right? Like you have to bring in these numbers. And so I also have to write headlines that are more punchy or, clickbaity from time to time in order to get people to look at my stuff. But at least I try to back it up with actual substance in my writing and things that are objective and balanced and that people can benefit from, not just straight up clickbait, like gotcha journalism. That's not what I'm into. And so within our own niche, it's been tough. I won't front, right? It's been tough in all of cannabis, frankly. And the media is no different because a lot of really great journalists, have lost jobs. A lot of great publications have gone by the wayside. It was awesome to see High Times get resurrected. But oh goodness, sorry, there was a really big thunder. I don't know if you guys just heard that. Oh yeah, there was a huge thunder strike here. Sorry, it scared me. Um, anyways, and so it's been hard to see, really good journalists in our space. Green Market Report, losing them was awful, and we're getting sort of, bottled into like one teeny little thing where it's like, okay, there's High Times, there's Green State, Cannabis Now is doing a little bit, they're holding on, right? Cannabis and Tech Today, they're holding on, MG. We're trying really, really hard to hold on, but it's tough. And so I would implore people that if you enjoy cannabis media, to support them, right? Like click on their stuff, share their stuff. If you work for a company that has a little money to spare, like advertise there because we will not exist without everybody working together to support us. And so, yeah, it's been hard to see, but I feel blessed to still be here and to be able to tell these stories. So,
Well, we hope the weather passes and isn't too disruptive to you. Next up will be Michael Crowitz. Michael?
Thank you. I'll tell you, it's certainly an interesting story. It never seems to be a day where there's not something new with cannabis that you can cover. At least you have that. It seems like this question, it was really about giving advice to new journalists, how to maintain integrity and authenticity within what you were saying. That seems a challenge, but I want to make it even expand this question a little bit more. What would be your advice in this world of ours to get started? Where would be a starting point, and how do you maintain that real that touchstone to the real world as you're trying to navigate those um algorithms?
it's hard, right? Especially because the algorithms are changing every single day, right? Like one thing that's working today might not work tomorrow. And so I just tell people to be consistent, right? Like maintain your voice, understand that there are trends that you want to follow, but be yourself. That's what people I think are looking for, especially in our community, right? People really want that authenticity. As far as where to start, I always encourage people to just, whether it's starting a Substack or their own kind of personal writing, anywhere that you can put your writing on the internet, do it. And it's not hard, right? There are a million different platforms where you can publish for free. And a lot of publications, Green State included, we're always looking for guest posts. So maybe you won't get paid, but you'll get a byline. You'll get, a link to your website or another story, a backlink, right? That can power your SEO juice, whatever it is. And so I know someone reached out to me recently and they said, people want me to write, but I feel like I have such imposter syndrome because I never studied journalism or anything. It's like, I didn't either. I studied education, right? I was working as a preschool teacher and here I am, right? If you love to write and you have something to say, just say it. And know that there are resources out there. Like Neiman Lab is a great resource for journalists, with different practices. There are lots and lots of resources out there for you to sharpen your skills. But if you have something to say, you definitely should say it, because even though there is a lot of noise, it's important to express yourself. And there are people out there who will feel seen by what you're doing, and you can inspire others as well.
And that will drive you onward. All right. So, all right. So, our final question. And as you're looking ahead, what trends or emerging stories in cannabis culture or policy excite you, Rachelle, the most? And how do you see your role covering them?
Well, like I said, I'm always interested in the new health studies that are coming out, which there are many. It's awesome when you see cannabis, working for people, and just having more evidence, for why it should like not be a Schedule One substance in our country, right? There's so much evidence, and so it's always really funny to me that people still want to, pull out the cherry pick, right? These like different little correlations for cannabis and more negative consequences. And not to say that smoking weed doesn't have risks, right? Everything does. And so I'm not going to come out here and say that like marijuana is 100% safe for every single person. I don't believe that, right? But like we need to be more balanced and informed, with what the plant is and what it isn't, on both sides of it, right? It's not a panacea, right? But it can be effective in a lot of use cases. And so always excited to hear about that. Always excited, for the new product innovations, right? Seeing things come out. I love testing new products. I know you guys were ripping on your Puffcos, before we started. I mean, that was such like a revolution, right? The Puffco peak. And so seeing new things come out, it's always really fun. And also just like what we don't know about cannabis. There's so much that we don't know about this plant, and we're just scratching the surface. I love following Miyabi Shields and Riley Kirk, two cannabis scientists. They make great content. They're incredible educators. I definitely, if you're not familiar with them, give them a follow. They make awesome content. And I'm really looking forward to the day, when cannabis is accessible for everybody, when the people who are in prison for this plant can go home to their families, and when we can stop being censored, right? Because we all know that social media censorship is affecting us. They're definitely trying to, keep this information from the people for whatever reason. And that needs to end too, because people need to know the truth.
That's for real. All right. Well, I'd like to thank you absolutely for a fascinating discussion. I would like to thank our council members, Mike Davis, Michael Crowitz, Nate Landau, and myself, Etienne Fontan. Rachelle Gordon, thank you for taking the time with us tonight and sharing your story, and we really appreciate it. So keep up the great work. We'll have some news soon, too. We've been doing some Freedom of Information Act requests ourselves, and so we'll be having some media fun time here real soon. So we look forward to that. And go check out on greenstate.com. Rachelle, do you have anything to promote at this time?
Well, yeah, thank you so much again, to the entire Veterans Action Council, and thanks for everything that you guys are doing. Putting in the hard work, taking your time to support other veterans and to tell them the truth about plant medicine and getting them access. And also thanks to all the veterans and their families, for their dedication and sacrifice for our country. Obviously, really appreciate that. And thanks to everyone who's watching. If you want to go check out greenstate.com, we would really, really appreciate it. You can also follow us at Your Green State on Instagram. We're also on Facebook, we're on YouTube, we're on LinkedIn. Wherever you take your content, make sure to hit us up. And if you have a story that you want to share, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you guys have cooking, so please definitely keep me in the loop. But anybody else who's watching, if you have a story that you want to share, whether it's a story of healing, a story about yourself in the plant, you have a cool brand, a cool product that you want us to check out, be in touch. Our DMs are open, and we'd be happy to hear from you, because all I really want to do is amplify the people in this world who have pure hearts and a passion for the plant. So if that's you, please be in touch.
Outstanding. All right. Well, everybody, that will wrap up. This has been our VAC Roundtable number 91 with Rachelle Gordon of greenstate.com, cannabis journalist. Thank you very much. Oops. And that's it. And